Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Azhar Jaimurzina Ducrest. I'm the Chief of Transport Connectivity and Logistics Section of Transport Division of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. It is a pleasure for us to contribute to this workshop on advancing the E-tier implementation. And while, unfortunately, I cannot be there in person, we were kindly invited by colleagues from the Economic Commission of Europe to share some of the updates and insights on the state of international transit along the Asian Highway Network. And it'll be my pleasure to share with you a brief presentation in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are not familiar with the Asian Highway Agreement and UNESCOP, let me just start with a few introductory slides. ESCAP is the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. We're the sister organization of UNECE, covering 53 members and 9 associate members across Asia and the Pacific. And as you can imagine, it's a very diverse and very significant part of the world, covering about 60% of the world population and 40% of world land area. The transport division of UNESCOP, in similarities with UNECE, services regional transport agreements. We have 3 main international transport agreements that cover the entire region. And one of them is the Asian Highway Agreement, the Intergovernmental Agreement on the Asian Highway Network, but it is complemented by the Similar Infrastructure Agreement for railways, the Trans-Asian Railway Network Agreement, and our more recent agreement on dry ports. But as in line with the scope of this meeting, let me introduce you a little bit more the history and the scope of the Asian Highway Network for those of you who have not dealt with that directly. It's a very traditional transport infrastructure agreement for road transport, which supports the coordinated development of road transport infrastructure across our region, and serves to connect Asia, but also Asia to other parts of the world, and in particular Europe. It is part of our overarching ambition to promote integrated multimodal transport and logistics system, and hence that's why it's not the only transport infrastructure agreement that we have, but it is the first agreement that was negotiated and initiated using ESCAP's platform. And the agreement itself was adopted in 2003 and entered into force 20 years ago in July. So what the agreement does, I will not go into details on this. Some of you are quite familiar with the mechanism of transport infrastructure agreement, but primarily, more importantly, it defines the network of Asian highway routes that connect the main economic and other centers of the region in support of international and regional trade and social and tourist exchanges. There is, of course, a numbering system that is also proposed in this agreement, and some of you who have driven through Asia may have seen the AH 341 and so forth nomination that are displayed on this major regional highway. Currently, the network covers about 145,000 kilometers of highways across 32 countries. In the region, they connect all the capitals of all of those 32 countries, and most of the population of Asia and the Pacific lives in the vicinity of the Asian highway roads. And as you can imagine, and it's quite similar to the rest of the world, road transport represents the bulk, the main mode of land transport that services domestic and international transport of goods. And we are expecting the road freight to continue growing quite exponentially, in fact, increase by 269%, according to some estimates, by 2050, compared to the 2015 level. The agreement sets out the minimum standard of quality or common classification of Asian highway routes by grade, and we, to some extent, also help monitor the quality of the network. You have some graphs here. I'll not go into details because of the pressure of time, but you can see the composition of Asian highway network. It includes 9 main arteries that are connecting Asia all the way up to Europe, or connect sub-regions of Asia, and then you have a more sub-regional road counting different parts of Asia: North and Central Asia, South and Southeast Asia, and East and Northeast Asia. And depending on the country, you have different number of highways and length, but both in numbers and in length, we have 3 countries that lead the number of highways, Asian highways in the region. It's China, Russian Federation, and Kazakhstan, but other countries, even the smaller ones, are of course represented, and we're hoping on and we're working on extending the coverage of the network. So there are 30 countries that are party to the agreement itself, but 2 additional countries whose territory is covered by the agreement, but they have, for internal reasons, not joined the agreement yet, at Singapore in Malaysia. But the Asian Highway Agreement itself has an intergovernmental working group that deals with the issues of maintaining the agreement, and that is open to all ASCAP member states. So it's not by no means it's limited to those 30 or 32 countries. And very importantly, and that's where I come to maybe the gist of the presentation, even though it's an infrastructure agreement, the working group is considering issues related to operationalization of international road transport along the network. So many issues traditionally known as transport facilitation are being considered by an intergovernmental working group that meets every 2 years. And in fact, we'll meet this year in June to continue the discussion. And alongside, as I said, of infrastructure connectivity, just seeing what sub-regions are covered by the network, what is the quality and status of the network itself. The working group looks into issues of what we call operational connectivity. And here you have 6 key issues that were identified by our member states in a regional framework on international road transport facilitation that range from road transport permits and traffic rights to visas, temporary importation of road vehicles, insurance, vehicles, weight, dimension, vehicle registration, and inspection certificate. And let me then, in this context, run you through a very clear example of what it is now, what is the status or what are the major issues of international road transport along the network. I will say that it doesn't focus just on the transit operation. It looks at all types of international transport, cross-border transport, bilateral, multilateral, in particular, but I think the overall status influence very, very strongly the opportunities and the possibilities for the ETO introduction or similar mechanisms. So first of all, and this is just an example, we've chosen the Southeast Asia as an example because that's where we expect the highest growth of road transport volume in the next couple of decades. And one of the issues that we have along the Asian highway network is the very, very divergent quality of the road transport network. And this is something that in practice hinders the opportunity for business, for international road transport, in as much as does, of course, as do all the regulatory and other obstacles, but bear in mind that there are quite a lot of bottlenecks and missing links still along the Asian highway network that unfortunately make transit also quite difficult. The other main issue that we have along a network is the issue of traffic rights. I'm sure that you all are very, very familiar with this. But effectively, especially in Southeast Asia, but it's part of also seen in other parts of our region, there's mostly the road transport permits are regulated by bilateral, in some cases multilateral agreements, and there are quite a few cases where there's no possibility of having mutually recognized traffic rights, and there is transshipment at the border. Or other arrangements that may exist across to help goods go across the border. And this is pretty much still the reality of Asia and the Pacific. And while ESCAP has done quite a lot to support sub-regional agreements and other type of agreements, we have a trilateral agreement between China, Russian Federation, Mongolia to facilitate traffic rights. But the reality is there are still quite a lot of transshipment happening at the border, and that restricts the opportunities for all type of international road transport operation. And here you have an example of quotas that exist that are fixed by countries in Southeast Asia, as an example that currently apply. To some extent, there may have been some changes already, but it's still, you can see the quotas are quite well set. Other issues on border crossing points, which would, in our opinion, quite impact very strongly any introduction of electronic systems, including it here, is that it is still parts of our region. Southeast Asia is a good example, but it's not the only example, is where there is 100% inspection rate of some types of cargo at numerous border crossing points. There's a very low level of computerization. There's a lot of manual processing of transport information and data. There's mixed traffic, so they're not separate lines for freight transport or passenger transport or transit transport as such. So this is something that's quite still very systemic in the region. Extensive and non-harmonized document requirements. We have an example for the border crossing between Thailand and Laos PTR, the kind of information that is requested. Of course, it doesn't apply for transit operations, but it just shows you the level of lack of harmonization for international transport. There is, because of the state of the infrastructure, but not only, there is a significant amount of congestion at major road transport border crossing in the region, mismatch of processes requirements, transit, especially, I think that's very much applicable to transit, which is supposed to be the simplified procedure, but it doesn't. As I said, there's mixed traffic, and there's still 100% inspection for all goods. And finally, and I've already mentioned this, it's not just extensive, the document requirements, the very different document requirements that are demanded at the border. So another issue that affects, and it's part of this overall picture, is that there are no harmonized standards on weights and dimensions for road freight vehicle along the Asian highway network or even its major segments. There are now growing divergence in the emission standards for road freight vehicles that are, so even though each year can facilitate the control of goods, the vehicles themselves are subject to controls and the requirements that are by and large not yet harmonized. And in fact, one of us findings in our major in our recent reports is that it's hard to conceive of one standard that will be applicable along the entire Asian highway network because of the different operating conditions and different capacities. And perhaps the best way to do it is at the corridor level. So even the Asian highway network itself, 145,000 kilometers, cannot. There's no appetite and possibility for one unique and harmonized standard on vehicle dimensions or emission standards. What we do as the Regional Commission to deal with this operation is, of course, first of all, increase the level of information available. It's still the case that it's hard to access information on the requirements for international road transport along the network, and we publish handbooks and various reports on the state of a particular types of road transport requirements. You have some examples here, and one of course flagship initiative that we do support is this agreement that I mentioned earlier on facilitating international road transport along the Asian highway network. There's an agreement that facilitates, that provides traffic rights for international road transport along stretches of Asian highway network, Asian Highway 3 and 4, which connects the territories of Mongolia, China, and Russian Federation. And one of the major news in this area is that Kyrgyzstan is in the process of acceding to this agreement, expanding its scope. This is our contribution to the issue of the traffic rights across, along the Asian Highway Network. I would like to conclude by saying that we have what we call regional strategic framework for facilitation of international road transport that identify those issues that I've just briefly mentioned. I didn't go into details on all of them, and they also look at the modalities for the implementation. And this framework will be reviewed in the coming year. And we would be very happy to work with UNECE to see what are the best practices, new solutions we can offer to the members of our network and beyond. The regional framework does not just limit itself to international, to the highway, to Asian Highway Network. And in this connection, I'm happy to tell you that the working group on the Asian Highway Network meets on the 4th and 5th of June this year in Bangkok, in person only, and this will be one of the issues to be considered, and perhaps some good developments on ITER could be brought attention during the meeting of that working group, and we will be working with the C Secretariat on that. To conclude, I would say that, of course, I did not go into specific issue of transit as itself, but more broader context of international road transport. It's still a key issue. It's still a central issue for transport connectivity, especially for landlocked developing countries in our region. We have 12 LLDCs across Asia and the Pacific. There are many sub-regional and corridor-based initiatives that can help promote a transit agenda, but one of the issues we are facing is how to coordinate them and make sure that they follow the recognized routes and existing standards. So again, this is something where we can join our forces with our colleagues in UNECE. But by and large, even though the legal frameworks are there, regulatory frameworks might be there, it's the implementation that remains an issue. I would flag that the advanced transport technologies, the possibility of electronically tracking cargo or vehicles, and navigation seals, it's something that does appeal to policymakers in our region. So that's a way to also introduce or raise the appetite and the uptake of electronic transit mechanisms and systems. And finally, please do consider the Intergovernmental Working Group and the Network of Asian Highways as a platform where we could showcase the existing and new transit initiatives or developments such as ITER. So with that, I shall stop. I hope this presentation has been useful, and please feel free to contact me for more information, and I hope to join one of those events in the future in person. Thank you very much, and good luck with the rest of your meeting. Thank you.